I remember when I first listened to Joe Rogan, he would have these long conversations with all different people, just like I like doing. And they'd be off the cuff and real, and you felt like you were at the table with them.
Does anybody tell you no? Does anybody go, Elon,
Yeah, it's a terrible idea. Terrible.
I always knew I wanted to do that. Why do people listen to me 100 times more than they listen to some celebrities who start podcasts with 100 million followers? It makes no sense at all, but it's because there is something about in this space, in the space of conversation and people talking, especially over the long form, where people want genuine, real things.
When you started the show, was it always going to be interviews?
Well, I always say this, I've never interviewed anyone in my life.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Travis Makes Friends podcast, where it's our mission to help you stop being lonely and make more friends. In an effort to do that, I'm showing you how I go about making some of the friendships in my life. So today, I'm making friends with Julian Dorey. Julian is a podcaster just like me. He's based out here in New Jersey, in Hoboken, which is actually where we're recording this episode. And he has been interviewing people for the last 4 or 5 years or so and has amassed almost 900,000 YouTube subscribers doing so. He talks everything from to people like spies, to conspiracies, to Area 51, and everything in between. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation. Julian, what's up, dude? Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for coming out here, and thank you for having me on, Travis.
Yeah,
of
great,
course,
man. Of course. So listen, man, I want to go back in time. And the idea is basically like, hey, the show's called Travis Makes Friends. Let's just talk like, hey, we just met, which we just did. And we're just having a friendly conversation, getting to know each other. So let's go back in time, bro. Talk to me about 9-year-old Julian. Set the scene. Ooh. Where were you? What were you doing? What was life like?
You're going way back.
Way back.
9-year-old Julian.
Throwback.
I don't know if anyone's ever asked me about that on a podcast before.
Perfect.
I got to actually think about this now. 9-year-old Julian. So I was an only child, which has certainly some great benefits, and then also, you know, some downside with that too, like having to figure some things out on your own.
Sure.
But as a 9-year-old, I think I was more or less like I was at a transitional period, I was about to change schools right then and get into a whole new group of people after having my own friend group established. So that was certainly a shift over. But I probably had my earliest aspirations at that point of being like an ESPN Sports Center anchor.
Okay.
At the time, I think that I had that dream at that point because I was a diehard sports fan, but I was very vicariously going through life.
Was this Jersey?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I grew up in South Jersey, outside Philly. I don't know if I used the word vicariously right there, so hopefully that made sense. But, you know, I grew up in West Deptford, so that was about 10, 15 minutes from Center City, Philly.
Okay.
And then when I was like 11, I moved to Mullica Hill, which was like 10 minutes, 15 minutes south of West Deptford. And that's actually where I ended up launching the podcast.
Oh, no
Fast forward, because that was my parents' house, and that's where this thing started when I moved back down there. But yeah, as a 9-year-old, I was pretty wide-eyed, trying to figure out the world, not knowing a lot of things. And
what did your parents do?
My dad is an attorney.
Okay.
He does like commercial litigation.
And has been your whole life?
Yeah. He loves what he does. Absolutely loves it. But he does like everything from a contract dispute to going in for, you know, some sort of like major corporate lawsuit, really all across the spectrum, anything that's not criminal. Like he never wanted to do that.
Yeah.
But my mom was a lot of different things. She was a teacher at a really, really good public school when I was born, and she left that behind to raise me, which I'm extremely, extremely appreciative of. And then by the time I was like 9 or 10, you know, obviously I'm going to school during the day. So she was a major fitness person and became a personal trainer.
Okay.
Actually co-owned a gym for like 5 minutes, which is a really bad business. I'm sure that was just a tax write-off, but she ended up turning that into like this really fun thing where she turned the basement of our house into a mini gym after they got out of that gym she had been in, and would just train like her friends as clients there. And, you know, I guess again,
always
like
teaching.
Teaching, make a little income. But she was also at the time became a professor at the community college in English and public speaking. So that kind of like allowed her to, like you said, always teaching, keep that itch
Yeah.
going. And it was something she could do like during the school day while I wasn't around. And then, she was raising me the rest of the time, which was certainly a lot.
Yeah. Even if it's only one, it's still a lot.
Yeah. Well, I was torture, so it's a lot with me.
What are some of the, like at that time, did you have any desire to have siblings? Like, did you look at other families and like, why don't I have a brother or sister?
I mean, did I have the thought? Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think you want to have people that, if you're not the oldest, they could show you the ropes, or if you're the oldest, you can kind of bounce ideas off somebody. And I come from big families. On my mom's side, she was one of 6 girls, and I have 18 cousins over there.
Jeez.
So, I was used to a lot of people in that way.
Yeah.
And we were the only family that only had one. But that's not how my mom wanted it. She had like 16 or 17 miscarriages or something like that,
wow.
which is obviously
a wild amount of miscarriages.
Yeah, it's a lot. I think it was up in that area.
She sounds like a savage, bro.
My mom is definitely one of a kind, but it worked out with me. So all the chips,
the lucky one.
Yeah, that's really how you should look at it. But all the chips were in that basket. And like I said, there's real benefits to this too. I would say one of the things is I didn't have to take on student debt. If I had siblings, I would have had to do that.
Yeah.
So like that to me is like winning the fucking lottery. But
anymore, that's definitely true.
Absolutely. I mean, I see this and some of my friends who still have it, trying to pay it. It's crazy how bad that gets. But yeah, I mean, I definitely wanted them, but it just wasn't in the cards.
Yeah. That stuff's crippling anymore. You know what I mean? The student debt and everything.
Absolutely.
This is the first time that 30-year-olds are worse off than their parents were when they were 30. First time in American history.
Yeah. You know what? I hadn't thought of it that way, but that is absolutely true across every economic benchmark without even looking at it.
Home ownership, living by yourself, autonomy.
Things cost so much too.
Yeah. And it's only getting worse.
Yeah.
Every bill that we have, like all of our like quote unquote fixed expenses.
Yeah.
They just keep inching up. And when you look at it across 12 bills, it's like, oh, that makes a significant difference in your like monthly nut that you got to cover. It's like, man, that's these little tiny increases might be tiny for that one bill, but combined, they're all making an impact. Yeah.
No, it's crazy because like obviously I made no money doing this for the longest time, and then when
I wonder what that's like.
It's interesting, bro. I mean, you understand the business, so you know what it is, but it's like. When I actually then did have some money, I was amazed at how little I had left over to spend on basic things.
Well, like you hear, Well, and how old are you?
I'm 31.
Okay, so I'm 32. So we're,
same area.
Yeah. We grew up thinking like you crack 6 figures, you're good. You know what I mean? Like you're golden. Like 6 figures is like cool. You can live in comfort. You can experience upper middle class with 6 figures. Now it's like 6 figures is. Like especially bottom, like 100K is becoming lower middle class,
especially based on where you live.
Especially if you live somewhere that's not cheap to live.
Right.
You think it's going to be okay, and then all of a sudden you look at your outgoing and your income, and you're like, whoa, what's happening? How is this possible?
Yeah.
And that's I think there's a lot of young people out there, especially young men, that are like disenfranchised from that because they did all the things that they were supposed to do.
Yes.
Like they got the schooling, they got the degree, they are working their asses off at a job they don't like, they're paying their dues, and then they look up and they still can't afford anything. And housing's only getting more expensive. Interest rates are through the roof. And it's like, well, what do I do about this? Yeah. Like, how can I possibly make something of myself in this like type of climate? You know what I mean?
And they're stuck looking at social media where the things are made to look perfect, or
absolutely.
This is what at all times you are one flick of the face recognition of your phone away from seeing everything that's great.
The highlight reel.
Exactly. Yeah. And even if it's not true, that's what you see. Mm-hmm.
Well,
and it makes you lose hope, The
0.1% is now in your face every day.
Yes.
All the time. You know what I mean? Like you open up TikTok or Instagram, you see these people. It's like, well, that person's 27, and how are they? And they're doing this, and blah blah blah. And you get in your head about it.
Yes.
When you realize that, like, we're talking about the 0.1% here. Like everybody refers to the 1%. I think that there's a massive misconception around who is actually in the 1%. Like 1% is only the top 1% in the country is like, I say only, but only like $450,000 a year or something like that.
That even seems high.
Which isn't like, only. I know that most people would be like, I would definitely trade my income for that.
I know exactly what you mean.
But typically you think top 1%, you're thinking, hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's like, that's not true. It's the 0.1% that's in your face all the time because they're the ones that are creating all the content. They're the ones that are going, they're sitting ringside at UFC, paying, 15, 18 grand for a seat. And, you're making that every 6 months.
That's right. And it's really, the disparity is crazy. It's when you look at those charts, I remember Dr. Steven Pinker had an amazing chart, I think in his book Enlightenment Now, when I read that like 5 or 6 years ago, where it shows like the splitting that really happened starting mostly in the 80s, where the difference between the upper echelon of society and the quote unquote middle class, which is becoming less and less middle class, just goes into a V.
Yep.
And his book was actually about all these amazing positive trends in the world, which I like. But he was saying this is actually one where, it's not necessarily as fully bad as it looks, but it's certainly creating some sort of disparity we're going to have to reckon with in society, because you'll see people out there right now. I mean, you see it like in the electorate whenever people are talking about any type of election now, so much comes back to the economy, because the differences of, no disrespect, but like the dude who lives in one of those buildings in New York with 75 million in cash in the bank account and stocks, has very different priorities from the guy who's got the small business he's been running for the last 10 years, living in, North Dakota.
Right.
And I respect where people are coming from when they feel like that. I mean, it's kind of cliche to say it, but, the American dream, so to speak, some people feel like it's dead. I don't think it's dead, but I understand it's harder.
It's seemingly dying.
These days.
Like the middle class. The middle class is the American dream. Like people, I think, sometimes position the American dream as like go make your billions.
Yep.
But really, the American dream is the middle class. Like America kind of invented that. Yes. You know what I mean? The fact that you could make 50, 60 grand a year, have a house. By the time you pay off your mortgage in 30 years from now, there's a bunch of equity built in that house. Yep. You have your 401k, you have some social security, maybe you have a pension, whatever, and you can live the rest of your life without having to go to work and things. And that's just becoming increasingly not attainable for a lot of people. And I think our generation is going to feel the brunt of it. And Gen Z coming up behind us is I think they have. It's more clear to them what they have to do. Like not everybody's coming out of high school being like, I have to go to school. I have to get into college. It's like there's actually a lot of other ways to make money and better money than what a lot of people coming out of college are getting paid. And so I think the middle class is continuing to shrink, unfortunately. And we're just going to have to decide, like our generation is going to have to decide, I don't want to be part of the middle class that keeps getting downgraded to poverty. Right, because that's the problem is like the middle class is shrinking, but it's not just people moving up to millionaire status; it's also people moving down into poverty status. That's why like you're losing it to both groups. So that's why my other podcast, Travis Makes Money, is all about that, because it's just like, man, I think that as a generation, we're going to have to step up to the plate and just be like, look, the situation handed to us is less than ideal, but it is the situation that we have. So what are we going to do about it? Sitting and whining and complaining about it all the time doesn't do anything to improve your situation at all. You're going to have to just make the decision. And the recognition and the perspective that we still have it better than 99% of the world.
That's right.
Like just living in the country puts you in the top 1% of the world in terms of income, housing, affordability, the ability to buy food, have access to clean water.
Yep.
I just had my Uber driver last night. I always say Uber, like, cause that's like the thing, but I use Lyft more than anything else. Just goes to show
People
you.
get it.
Yeah. Market, first to market, owns the market. But, my Lyft driver, he was from Ghana. He's been over for 5 years. And we were talking a lot about that, cause he was talking the whole way about how much there's how much work he has to do to make the money that he makes.
Oh, yeah.
He's got his own barbershop. So he's, small business owner. And he was telling me yesterday, he was like, man, the snow, nobody came in today. And he's like, I could have just sat there and whined about it, but instead I just turned on my Lyft, and now I've made like $90 today driving for Lyft. And it was, and he was just talking about how, go spend a couple months in Ghana where I'm from and go look at all the kids that are starving and then realize that you have really nothing to complain about when you're talking about like, oh man, why can't I drive a BMW instead of a Honda? And it's like, okay, well,
first world
champagne problems, man, champagne problems. Not to say that they're not problems, not to say that they shouldn't be addressed, but also recognize the position that we're in, and then we gotta be more proactive is really the bottom line. It's like we're just gonna have to figure out, like, buckle down, figure out a way how to bring in some more income and push to live the life that you actually want to live. And you're not gonna happen into it.
Absolutely. No, it's amazing, Paul. I loved every single thing you said there, and what one of the things you're getting at is perspective too. Now, it's very hard, and I understand this is just a human psychological phenomenon. It's very hard to have perspective when something is not literally in your backyard.
Yeah.
Right? Even today, where we can see things on the internet around the world, if I really wanted to go see what it's like in Ghana to some extent, I could go on to
YouTube it.
Google. Yep. Exactly. I could go. Exactly. So, it doesn't have the same effect, though, in a way. And I do think about that sometimes, because I don't want to be the, like you said, the champagne problems, crying into the abyss here when other people would kill and do kill to be here. But that doesn't mean that you can't try to improve the system. Absolutely. You and I are talking about at home, and try to make it amazing and so far ahead in the world, so that even more people want to come here because of what it stands for. Yeah. And that's certainly something that we got to reckon with, because you talk about all these kids who are suddenly rejecting some things. Sounds like someone's fucking dying out there. I'm sorry. This is one, like, we have this place so noise proof, but the fire trucks, they will get through. Sorry about that.
Hey,
but you see
it just shows that we're in Jersey.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You got to get the grittiness. But you see all these kids now, ranging from millennials to Gen Z, who are rejecting this plan because, and I talk about this all the time, this plan that was sold to them, like, just without subconsciously, it's just wired into their mind as young men and women, which is, you grow up, you work hard in school, you try to get decent grades, you do okay on the SAT, get into a good enough college, sign that loan when you're 17, go drink, smoke, and fuck, and make sure you study while you're there for 4 years. Yeah. When you get out, try to get a job in a respectable industry, something that's moving forward.
Work hard, pay your dues.
That's right. Pay your dues, work through your 20s, find your person in your late 20s, get married by 30, start popping out kids at 32, saving up in that 401k while you're going along this, and maybe by the time you're 40, you're making that beautiful $150,000 check and rising through the corporate ranks. And once you get there, you say, you know what, I'm going to start playing golf on Saturday morning with the boys just to feel like you're doing something important. But really, you're just trying to get away from your wife that you were convinced you were supposed to fall in love with in your late 20s, because that's what society says you got to do.
Right.
And then as you go along, maybe you get into your 50s, and now they're giving you a plaque on your wall, a nice little bit better corner office, but you're still sweating about what your retirement's going to look like at 65. Yeah. When you get to 65, you're going to say, well, between Social Security and what I get out of this 401k, I need to make this last. And now we're all living longer, so hopefully this fucking lasts for the next 30 years. And you know what? Maybe I'll get a condo in Florida and sit here and look at the sun and wait to die.
Right.
And there's just something about that. By the way, perspective says there's people who can do that exact model and be so happy because they're not looking at it as cynically as I just looked at that. And I love that. But there's also the people that look at that and they only felt the need to go through these early parts of the process because society tells them to do that.
Exactly.
And they're starting to wake up to realize, wait, there's not that much here. That's not what I want. And there's other opportunities out there. Let me use the resources I have, be it on the internet or the things at my fingertips, to try to actually get somewhere in life. And that's how you break the chains of, like, breaking out of that lower middle class, or if you will. But there's also, I don't think we should get lost in this. We as a society, all of us, and the younger generations, do have to take some responsibility as well. It can't just all be pointing at the boomers and saying, fuck you for all this shit.
Well, like, how long are you going to do that?
What do you mean?
How long are you gonna just blame it on
Yes,
them?
exactly.
It doesn't do anything good for you long term to do it. It's like, maybe take a couple of months and whine about it. Maybe take a couple of weeks and whine about it, whatever. But when it's been a decade and you're still pointing the finger at other people, it's like, you can't, like, there's no path forward to that except for cynicism, drugs, alcohol addiction, misery, depression, anxiety. All of those things come from just focusing on all the stuff that's completely outside of your control, that's never going to lead you down a path to anything good. And you feel like justified. You feel you feel entitled to a certain life, upset that you didn't get that life,
Yes.
and then justified to point the finger at somebody else for a really long time until you finally have to, like, at some point, you have to face the music
And when you're
figure it out.
and when you're doing that and you're pointing the finger, what's the average person doing?
What's that? Yeah.
Yeah, fuck you.
Yeah.
And this is the reality. Like, I monetize making content, right?
Yeah.
You know what I love about my content? It's long form so people can stick it in their ears and go about their day and be productive.
Yeah.
It's not a fucking, and it's, I love movies. I think there's a time and place for everything. Of
course.
But we have such an addiction to constant content in our feed.
It's hits of dopamine, man.
Right.
Dopamine's a dangerous drug.
Yeah. And I see people all the time, and I observe it more and more than ever. Like, I have started using AirPods less and less than I ever have. I've started using my phone for non-business less and less than I ever have. Now, when I come home after the gym in the morning and I'm doing business, yeah, my phone stays open because I make content. I'm constantly changing files and things like that, making
Messaging
calls,
people. Yep.
right? But I like to think, like, I use Instagram like a lot less than the average person. You won't see me going through a fuck ton of stories all the time or anything like that. Like, there's a time and place because you're supposed to be able to get away from this stuff. There's a reason Steve Jobs didn't want his kids owning these things. And so I understand people have grown up with the phone attached to their hand and everything, but some of that addiction, and as you said, very righteously so, feeding the dopamine beast with this and some other things, it's like, at some point, you got to say, all right, maybe if I did less of that, spend an hour less on that a day and an hour more on my dreams over 365 days, that's 365 extra hours maybe that I spent on that. And by the way, I don't say this as a preacher. I say this as someone who still, myself, will even evaluate that and be like, sometimes was I busy after I was doing my tweets that I got to do, looking through other people's tweets I didn't need to?
Totally resonates.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we all have to take, myself included, we all got to take some responsibility for that and, maybe eliminate some of the distractions, or at least, even if you're not going to eliminate them, just limit them.
Mitigate. Yeah.
Yes, mitigate.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah, dude, it's a strange time. Strange time. And like I said, I think we're going to be the ones that we're going to have to pioneer a way to figure out a different path.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to get a lot of the benefits of the quote unquote American dream that, who knows if Social Security will even be around by the time we're able to collect some of it, even though we're all paying into it. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. But yeah, dude, it's a problem, but it's also, we're human. Humans are meant to solve problems, which is why mental health has become a problem in America. We're like the leaders in mental health problems, which is a problem for sure. And I'm not trying to downplay mental health at all, because it's a very real and visceral problem, especially if you're feeling it in the depths of depression or you have high anxiety or whatever. It's like, those are not, things that you can just ignore and be like, well,
That's right.
But somebody else is not getting drinking water. It's like, okay, but it doesn't make the feelings that you're feeling less real. But it is a first world problem. It's like, we've already taken care of so many other problems that now, like I said, we're wired to solve problems. So whenever you don't have any problems, you're going to find more problems, especially if that's what you're focusing on all the time. So you got to get better at learning how to solve the problems rather than just saying that they exist. You know what I mean? Which is sometimes I think it's sometimes gets me in trouble, but the dangers of therapy, again, therapy is really great and probably a lot of people should be doing it, but you can get into this cycle of just like learning why you're a certain way and then blaming it on your parents for so long. And I will say that's one of the things that I've learned being a parent is that, like, no matter how good of a job you try to do as a parent, you will inevitably screw something up.
Yes.
And your kid, no matter how good of a parent you think you are, is going to be 27, pouring out their heart to their therapist, talking about the things that you messed up.
My dad did this to me.
Exactly. And it's just like, ultimately, okay, like you get dealt the hand. And some people get dealt a really, really, really crappy hand. But also, one of the advantages of having the podcast is I've talked to so many successful people, and almost all of them have had problems in their life that are way worse than the ones that I've ever come across and figured out a way to get around them. Yeah. It's like if somebody else got dealt a crappier hand that you got dealt and figured out a way around it, then like we can too. It just starts with being willing to take responsibility for the situation that you're in. And taking responsibility is not the same thing as taking fault. Like sometimes things happen, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to decide what you're going to do about it. And you can decide to blame that on somebody else. You can just decide to focus on the things that are completely outside of your control, or you can decide to get focused on the things that are within your control and actually do something about it.
Yeah, it's funny you bring this up because I was having a conversation with a close friend of mine over the weekend about this same exact thing, where it's like, your parents, even the most amazing parents, aren't perfect.
Yep.
But what ends up happening is we've kind of incentivized in society to focus on only the negatives that our parents did, as if we're going to be these fucking amazing parents that would do a better job in every way. It's not to say some people don't have bad parents. Some people do, for sure. But like, my parents were amazing. And yet, my mom, I can point to, and I'm not even going to say this out loud, what they are. I can point to a couple different things I really struggle with today that are a direct result unintentionally of like ways that she parented. But my mom was like a fucking amazing mom.
Right.
And I'm never going to sit here and say otherwise. And some fucking shrink isn't going to tell me, well, actually, your mom was raised. Go fuck you.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Like, we'll deal with our problems. And like, as far as I'm concerned, it's exactly what you said. Some of the things I deal with are a first world problem. And I think that's great. It's not to say you should, when there's things mentally going on upstairs that aren't all in order, it's not to say you should be like, well, fuck you, get over it, like automatically. Like, yeah, like anything else in your health, you should kind of treat that. But you don't have to sit there and wallow in it and make it define you and make it, by the way, I see this all the time with people, a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
That's another thing I do wrong once in a while that I'm totally at fault for.
Well, it becomes part of your identity. Like that becomes kind of the problem, is when you're only diagnosing problems is if you're going to treat the problem, you have to be aware that it exists, which is a great reason for therapy to exist. It helps you be aware of and understand the problems that you're experiencing. Like you said, I had a great mom, but there's a couple of things that I struggle with that were a direct result of how she parented me. Okay, great. But what do you do from that point? Like, just keep talking about it. Like, just keep whining to your therapist about it. Just keep, like I said, for how long? How long is it gonna, it doesn't ever follow to continue down that path, because there's no way out of it if you only ever talk about the problem. It's like, once you understand the problem, you gotta be willing to do something to take care of the problem, not just sit in the problem and think about it all the time and stew on it and be like, well, if my parents would have done this better, then I would be in this other position. It's like, probably true, but who cares? Like, it doesn't matter that you have that now. So it's the frame that I always use is it happened. Now what?
Yeah.
Right. Like, okay, you can recognize that it happened. Again, you can feel bad about it for a second, but you can't live in that forever. What are we doing about it?
Yeah.
Right.
I saw a quote the other day. I'm going to fuck it up, but I'm going to paraphrase it, and then this will get the point across. It was basically like, not making a change is making a choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was I was like, oh, that's perfect.
I've been going through the rabbit hole of different like philosophical ideas recently. And the one that I can't accept is that idea of determinism, where like everything, basically free will doesn't exist.
Right.
And we're all predetermined to make the choices that we're making and whatever. It's like, I can't get on board for that, because I don't find it an effective frame to be able to use to go throughout your life. Like, if you just believe that things are going to happen the way they're going to happen, regardless of the choices that I make to change them, then you adopt this really nihilistic. Like, I don't understand how determinism does not lead you down a path of nihilism, which is a really, really dangerous place to be.
I agree. I just had Rizwan Virkin here, who's an awesome guy and simulation theorist. And I was like, even at the simplest level, I'm saying to myself, so if I do this right now, it makes no sense. I just threw that across the room. I just decide to do that on the spot. Like, the idea that there's not some sort of free will right there and, some fucking entity just controlled me doing that. Yeah. I can't get with that.
Right. Yeah. Well, it takes all autonomy away and makes you feel like no matter what I choose, I'm predetermined to be this like lazy piece of shit, because that's how I feel and that's who I am. And because my parents raised me to be this certain way, that's just, it is what it is. And I wish I got a different hand, but those other people, you start pointing the finger and coming up with excuses of why that person was able to figure it out and you can't. Because again, when something becomes part of your identity, it becomes really difficult to act outside of that identity.
Yes.
If you believe something's a part of you, if you believe you're a certain way, it's hard to make choices to change that about you, because you just think that's who you are. That's how I am. So, it can be helpful sometimes to diagnose those issues, but if there's not a plan to move forward and get past them, what are you doing?
Preaching to the
next,
choir, man.
you know?
I completely agree.
Let's get back in your story a little bit, man. So mom was in education and dad was an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
So I assume education was a big part of where they were pushing you to be. So talk to me about your steps, kind of, high school. What were you thinking you wanted to do versus where you ended up going for school?
Yeah, by high school, I was still in that mindset. I was telling you earlier, I don't know exactly when it started. Maybe it was when I was like 9, but in early high school, I still wanted to be like a broadcaster. And then I would say by the second half of high school, I was really open. I'm like, there's so much out there. I don't really know what's what. So I ended up going to college and starting off with a just base degree as far as like major goes. And then freshman
Where'd you go to
year,
school?
I went to a school called Bucknell.
Okay.
It was in the middle of PA. Really good time. But by midway through freshman year, I started to figure out, all right, I want a business degree. So I got into business school there and did, I think the major was called like global management or something. So a more kind of basic, broad framework. Really felt like it was a great education. And I think this is part of being an only child and not necessarily being able to sit around the campfire with siblings and talk about life or the possibilities out there. But I was very almost self-cocooned in a way in that plan where it's like, all right, now it's senior year. I'm coming up on the end of college. Got to get a respectable job or whatever. So I never really thought about like what jobs do or what their purpose is or how I was going to feel doing it. So I applied to like 120 jobs, some ridiculous number. And it's all about who you know, obviously. So most of the places I was just cold applying, didn't know anyone. And, you'd get to some final interviews or even not get to interviews at all. But then I developed a really close relationship with my buddy's dad from college, and he ended up saying, hey, would you want to come work with me? And I was like, fuck yeah, because he was this very high-powered Wall Street guy, and I had some familiarity with what he did because I had done an internship in a very similar business after sophomore year of high school, so I at least had some familiarity. But it was not like I loved him and like his style and everything, but I never thought about like, am I going to love this job? And in a lot of ways, in hindsight, to be fair to myself, I don't think you can really know that in a lot of ways till you do something.
To be fair to all young people,
yes.
You don't know.
But I'm very grateful I did it because getting thrown into that world really made me have to broaden my horizons and grow up fast. Because, when you say Wall Street, that can mean fucking a million different things, right? So my end of Wall Street, I was in private banking investment group at Merrill, which is a part of Bank of America, which means our team, ran by my boss, managed ultra high net worth individuals and some public companies with things like 10b5-1 plans or something as easy as like a 401k plan, which is like, that's just really a way to have people you advise and then make them clients. But, in that part of the business, the way it works is you come out of college, grind like a dog for 4 or 5 years, you make no money. But if you do a great job and you actually make it through, which a lot of people don't, I learned that when I came in, then you get the offer, so to speak. And so I had an amazing relationship with my boss. I worked really hard. I did a good enough job, and he made me an incredible offer end of summer 2019. But I knew at that point, it had been like just sticking in my craw for at least the last 2 years at that point, that I liked him. I liked our team. I loved the camaraderie. Yeah. I loved the aspect of my job where I had to go out and meet everyone.
Liked the people, hated the job. Yeah.
That's right. Fucking picture me a banker in a suit. It's not working, right? So he, to his credit, because we were so close, like obviously that made him sad, but he totally respected it because like he knew. Yeah. And part of coming out.
So you just told him?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like he made me an incredible offer. I would have made money for the first time in my life. And me, I guess this is just a part of my life story. Money has never been the thing that pushes me over the top with things. I got to like what I'm doing. Yeah. And so some people would say stupidly, and they might not be wrong about that. I said no. And I think, at that point, I know he kind of saw it coming. But, part of it was I was always a creative guy, a creative brain. And I just never recognized that. I'm like, damn, you've been writing for the school paper since you were like fucking 13. you always were more drawn to the creative arts and things like that. And then when I got out of college, I had all these side projects and side LLCs, and they always involved like marketing or creating content and stuff like that, or writing things. And that's where I was making no money doing that, but I loved it.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay.
That's the solve right there.
Yes. That's where I got to get to. So that's kind of where I was at. And then this was born out of like, when I said no to that offer, my boss, who was a gangster, he was like, all right, you're doing a great job with what I need you to do. At the time, the way it works is he made me that offer because now he's going to start paying me. But at the time, the way we had it set up, the way it is set up when you come out of college is the company's paying you. So he's like, don't say anything. They're going to keep paying you so you can pay your bills and pay your rent and stuff. And while you're trying to make this shift, you hang with me here and do your good work, and we'll see you off in that way, which was a godsend. So in the midst of all this, I was applying to jobs that paid $38,000 in New York City. Like I was willing to
kind of like creative type
yes,
jobs.
I did not care. I was willing to prove it, and people weren't even giving me interviews. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Not because they're not like, oh, we don't think you could be good. They're like, it's easy for us to figure out where a 22-year-old out of college who had a marketing degree goes versus a guy who's been in banking for the last 4 years, which I get that. So I got my ass kicked on the job trail, and I was finally making headway in February 2020. And then the pandemic hits and everything dried up. I had this little side project on the side about, well, if I started a podcast, I'd do it right. So my dumb ass spent any money I had on this fucking equipment you see in front of you right now.
Yeah.
A lot of it. And, then the pandemic hit, and Friday, March 13th, the first day of quarantine, I remember I got the notification. I'd forgotten that I had ordered this shit on like March 4th. Because then if you remember, like shit was going crazy. I was still working on Wall Street. So we were like balls to the walls. I forgot all about it. And I get the notification, your equipment has arrived downstairs. And I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I go get it. I bring it upstairs. I put it on the couch in my apartment. I like stand back and look at it. I don't know if it was like 15 seconds or 30 seconds or a minute. I'm just standing there like this, looking at this equipment. And I'm like, Julian, you have done a lot of stupid shit in your life, but this is without a doubt the stupidest shit you've ever done.
Among them. Yeah.
Yes. And there was just a pause. And then I was like, well, I guess I got to go for it now.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really say anything. And some fortuitous things happened. My dad gave me a call probably a couple days later. And this is when they were saying like 2 weeks to stop the curve.
Of course.
If you remember.
Yep.
And we were in the heart of the storm up in North Jersey and New York City.
Sure.
So my dad calls me and goes, hey, do not resign your lease. So my lease was going to be due on April 1st. He's like, do not resign this. This shit's going to be a year. I was like, what? I'm like, no, Malaka, they said 2 weeks to stop the curve. He's like, no, it's good.
I trust the media.
Yeah. Yeah. He's like, no, it's going to be a year. And then my boss called me, and we had really done as a team, like an amazing job having our clients set up for this. So within like 3 days of the pandemic actually hitting, people were in business. And we were like, whoa, like, it's still touch and go because you don't know what's going to happen the next day. But we're like, yo, I think we're going to be good. So he's like, hey, now that the pandemic hit, I assume all your job opportunities just dried up. I said, yeah. And he goes, all right, why don't you just chill here? A little bit of work to do every day until we go back to the office. And I was like, all right, cool. So that they ended up never going back to the office. So over the next 6 months while I was building this podcast full time, my boss, it got to a point where some days there wouldn't even be anything to do. And I was able to at least collect a paycheck, and that gave me just enough runway. That and being able to move home on April 1st gave me just enough runway as it would turn out all the way to last to when I first started making money, which was not like any money, which was not until 2022. Okay. So you can imagine, like, obviously, I mean, I didn't even buy socks in that period. So I knew how to be bootstrapped, and obviously I've been working 7 days a week since then. That still continues. But I also could never have done anything I've done without my parents, because when I got back on April 1st to their house, I had all this podcast equipment with me. And my dad looked at it and he's like, what the fuck is that? And I'm like, I don't know.
It's a few $1,000s.
Yeah. And he's like, he looked at the back room and he's like, well, if not now, when? And I was able to make
props to your dad.
Props to my mom and dad. Like, they let me make a makeshift studio, back there, which to this day I'm proud of, as far as what, just being able to make one in your parents' house. And they just watched me get to work. And it's not like they understood anything about what a podcast was or YouTube or how to monetize this or how it was going to work. But in some way, they always believed in me and they supported it because they're like, he's good at it. He'll make it work. And obviously, we've been able to get to the point we're at now. And I was able to move out of there August 2023 and come up here and build my own place, which is nice, but it's never, we certainly haven't made it. It's a constant battle every day. It's just the nature of the game.
Well, props to you as well, dude, for realizing like the system, whatever blanket, term you want to throw at it, society, culture, whatever, trains you kind of what we we're talking about earlier on that, traditional path, which is, I call it the 40-40-40 plan. You work 40 hours a week for 40 years, retire on 40% of your income.
Never heard that.
But it moves you toward this path that I believe is solving for the wrong problem. And the problem that you're solving for is retirement. And I just think that is a silly term to use.
Yeah.
Because if you, like what you figured out really early on, despite having a big job offer thrown at you, you figured out that you don't want to solve for the problem of, I want to make a bunch of money so that I can retire when I'm 60. You solve for the problem of, I want to spend every day doing what I want to do.
That's right.
Not to say, I think this is where people get it confused, not to say that there's not grade A levels of shit sandwiches you got to eat along the way. Like there's going to be problems. There's going to be days where you wake up and you're like, what am I doing? This is stupid. Why did I do this? There's a lot of pain involved in both paths.
Yes.
But I find that the pursuit of something that you want will bring you more fulfillment, happiness, meaning, etc., than the achievement of something that somebody else wants for you.
100.
That makes sense.
Oh, that's so well said.
If you're climbing, it's going to be work either way is the point. You may as well put that work into climbing the mountain you actually want to climb.
Yes.
Like to me, the worst case scenario is climbing a mountain, putting in all that work, years and years and years. You get to the peak and then you look over another mountain. You're like, I actually wanted to be on that mountain. And frankly, I don't really care if I made it to the top of that mountain. I just want to be on that one.
Yep.
On the climb at some point, even if it involves, all of this struggle along the way. Mark Manson, I love, talks about like, what's the shit sandwich you're willing to eat? What's the thing? He's a writer, multiple New York Times bestseller. Mm-hmm. His book, Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, sold, over 10 million copies, I think.
Have you had him on your podcast?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 3-4 years ago.
Yeah.
And I love his stuff. He's kind of just more like a bro philosopher, but really, really intelligent and articulates things really clearly. And that's one of the things that I love that he says is like, what's the shit sandwich you're willing to eat? And he talks about it when it comes to writing. It's like writing is hard. It's really, really difficult. And sometimes it sucks, but I love it. I love the process of writing. Even when it sucks, it makes me feel like I'm fulfilled. It makes me feel something like meaning, like there's meaning and purpose attached to my work in some regard. It's like, that's the problem you should be solving for, not the problem of like, I need to retire on my 401k one day.
Let me ask you something. When you were diagnosed with cancer in your early 30s, the day you got that diagnosis, were you given one fucking thought to your retirement?
No.
Yeah.
No, not at all, dude. Not at all.
We are here for but an instant, and we don't get to control when it ends or how it ends. And it's like,
only the only guarantee is that it will end.
Yep. And it's like, are you really going to live your whole life to plan for when your bones aren't as good and your body's not as strong and it could end any day? And, but I had enough money saved to do this.
Right.
Listen, cross those bridges when you get to them. I'm not saying there's no room for planning certain things. Sure. I'm not saying you should live your life completely on the edge at all times. But if that becomes your all-consuming reality, you are going to be the person who, even if you do climb a mountain the way you just put it in your visual right there, you're going to be looking at all the other mountains and like you said, wishing you were on them. Yeah. And I never wanted to be that guy. I mean, I want to do everything, right? So there's always going to be mountains I look at like, damn, it would have been so cool to be fucking an award-winning artist or something like that. But, you can't do everything. That said, are you doing something that scratches your itch, something that you have an intense passion about? Doesn't mean that all the work that comes with it you're going to be passionate about. I, for one, am sick of all the shit I got to do outside the studio at this point. There was a time where I did like it. Now it's a drag. But the main job of what I do, that's just a part of paying the dues. The main job of what I do, sitting in the studio, talking with some of the most interesting people in the world across all different topics, I love it.
Yeah, right.
It's still as fresh as it was day one, actually more fresh, because it's like I keep getting talk to people that I'm like, oh my God, this person's really here right now.
Right.
It's a crazy thing.
Yeah, well, I'm curious what you think about this. I've heard from different people a way to find kind of like your passion or the thing that you should be doing is to kind of re-engage with the childhood version of you.
Yes.
It seemed like that lined up for you because at the beginning of this, you were talking about being a sports broadcaster and you wanted to be doing something in broadcasting, and then you found meaning fulfillment through creative outlets along the way while you're in banking. And then all of a sudden now you're a podcaster. So you're
an editor.
Literally doing the thing that you wanted to do when you were a kid, just in a completely different, frame, talking about, spies and Area 51 and things like that, rather
Everything
than
in
just
between.
sports. But you re-engage with that version of yourself and then kind of get to, be that along the way. I feel like when you're a kid, you can be apologetically you when you're a kid.
Yes.
Or unapologetically you when you're a kid. And then as you grow older, you become this just amalgamation of everything else in life: society, culture, religious context, parents, teachers. They pour into you, and this is not a bad thing. It's just part of what happens. You lose sight of who you are, which you never did when you were a kid. So I think in a lot of ways, when you're coming to that point in your life as an adult where you're just like, man, what am I doing this for? Why am I doing this? It can be really helpful to go back and ask yourself, like, what did I do? What did I enjoy when I was growing up? And that's kind of how it was for me. Like when we were growing up, me and my friends would always just find ourselves at a friend's house at like midnight, just making stupid videos. And this is before YouTube even existed. And we half the time wouldn't even edit them. We would just come up with a plot and just start filming stuff and writing stories and being creative and fulfilling that creative outlet. And now I find myself being a podcaster and doing more things that are in that creative field. And I think there's something to that, but I'm not sure that works for everybody because I haven't obviously legitimately tested it, but I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah. I mean, you're nailing something that really speaks to, I was just pulling this up. A clip that I watch all the time. I posted it before just because it's like it identifies the problem so perfectly. But Carl Sagan was talking about the imagination and wonder of kids when they're in kindergarten, and then the complete lack of that by the time they're 12th grade. And he's like, something crazy has happened. So if we got to edit this out later, just because if there's some copyright in here, I'm not sure, but I want you to see this.
You go talk to kindergarten kids or first grade kids, you find a class full of science enthusiasts. And they ask deep questions. What is a dream? Why do we have toes? Why is the moon round? What's the birthday of the world? Why is grass green? These are profound, important questions. They just bubble right out of them. You go and talk to 12th grade students, and there's none of that. They've become leaden and incurious. Something terrible has happened between kindergarten and 12th grade, and it's not just puberty.
And you're a nerd if you love science in the 12th grade, right?
Absolutely.
And it's so right, because you talk about it like something changes in people, and it's interesting that you bring up the whole my life ended up making sense from when I was unapologetically a kid. I as crazy as this is, I never even had time to sit back and think about that till maybe like the last year or so. Because as I laid out in my story, things were happening so fast that there was no time for reflection.
Sure.
But then I was like, oh, damn, I did want to be an ESPN broadcaster when I was young. Now I'm broadcasting on my own. And I was like, oh, damn, like I was an artistic guy when I'm young. And the whole reason this podcast exists, by the way, is because I use my artistic talents to edit. Doesn't matter how, if people think I'm great at the job itself, that's awesome. I appreciate that. I could be as good as I want to be at this, and no one would ever know if I had not been able to reinvent how to do podcast shorts and create works of art in a way and become a great editor, which is, I take a lot of pride in that and how it built it and how this helped build the thing. But also, like, when I never even thought about this one too, one of my friends was bringing this up like earlier this year. You know, when I was in middle school, I mentioned my mom was a public speaking teacher, but my English teacher, this guy, Mr. Stockwell, who's the man, he would have some of the kids go and do these public speaking tournaments.
Okay.
And so when I was in 5th grade, December of my 5th grade year, he had some kid get like mono or something and drop out. So he came to me a week before some competition or something and said, hey, I think you'd be good at this. Can you memorize like a 5-minute famous speech by next Saturday and just come and do it? And my mom was like, oh, you should totally do that, because she was like teaching the class. She thought it was so cool. And long story short, I did those from 5th through 8th grade. And until I got my braces on in 7th grade, I won every single one. And then there was like a short time where I couldn't talk. And then by 8th grade, I figured out how to talk again and was winning all of them. And and then I never did it again. Never thought about it. But it was like one thing I was really good at. And now look at what I'm doing for a living.
Right,
you know,
exactly.
it all like all these things like kind of tied together, and it makes you think like, damn, things do really line up sometimes, even when in places where it starts to look a little confusing or you're not really sure how to go, like that inner, if you listen to it, that inner compass points you in the right direction.
Yeah, my son's in kindergarten right now, so pulling up that clip made me think of this. The other day, my son came home from school, and he had my wife is good about like packing stuff in their backpack that they might need just in case, So she had another like pair of underpants that she packed in his bag just in case he like had an accident in school or whatever. And he didn't. I don't even think he had an accident. But she was like, "What happened to the other? Or why is there another pair of underwear in your backpack?" And he was like, "Well, I realized that I put on 2 pairs of underwear this morning when I went to school. So when I went to the bathroom, I took off one of the other pairs of underwear, and then I brought it back with me and put it in my backpack." And I just like imagined my son, and the school he goes to, it's kindergarten through 12th grade.
Yeah.
So I just imagine my son like walking from the bathroom with just a pair of underwear in his hands, just like walking down the hallway, like nothing matters, back into his classroom and putting it in the top of his backpack in front of everybody. You know what I mean? But like when you're a kid, you just don't care about any of that shit. You don't care. There's like, you don't, like we grow up and start caring about what everybody else thinks.
Yes.
And put into environments where you can't help but depend on the opinions of other people.
And that's what we live in now.
Right.
That's all it is. I mean, I'd be lying if I said there's not constant battles with that every day for me. And I think I'm pretty fucking good at not worrying about a lot of things. But there's still that little social anxiety with some things like, oh, what would they think? Or how would they, and oh, I hate it. It's so unnatural. It's a programming that we've done to ourselves.
Just like, when do those thoughts start creeping in? You know, like what's your pair of underwear? That you can just walk in front of everybody, not care that you got a pair of underwear in your hands, and they not care that like people, what are they thinking? How did they respond? Did they think that I peed myself? Like, what, you know what I mean? You didn't think about any of that. It's just like, it was just matter of fact. I put on 2 pairs of underwear. I had to take one off, and then I walked back to the classroom, put it in my backpack. I was like, oh, that's okay. Cool,
good
buddy.
for you, dude.
Yeah, you do you, bud.
That's great. And I hope, one day when I'm a father, like I'm sure I'll fuck some things up. That's just how it is. But there's a lot of the benefits of learning from guys like you and learning from so many different people I have through here from all walks of life, many of whom are parents, is hearing like the things they think they did right or things that they do differently or whatever. And also like having perception on how people are wired when they're adults and maybe what got them there, and thinking of the psychology of that. And one of the things I really want to value with my kids is not have stupid questions, not make fun of them if they ask something stupid or whatever. I don't want to put them in a position where suddenly they're like, oh, I don't want to, what if I have the wrong idea about this? Like, some teacher comes to me and says, your kid asked too many fucking questions. I'll be like, well, you're a fucking terrible teacher.
Right. Exactly. That's probably a good sign to switch schools.
Yeah. It's like, we got to keep that childlike wonder. And I will say this, there's obviously some of it that has hung on with me because there's a part of me that, is a little bit like Peter Pan, doesn't grow up in a way. And it's actually some of that I'm going to work on a little bit, but most of it I think is like a good thing. And, and like being open-minded on a lot of things in a world where people don't want to be open-minded. It's almost like, that makes you a rebel now, which is crazy to me. Yeah, it is. But I'm gonna unabashedly do that. If I wanted to grow fast, if I wanted to grow the fastest, there's 2 things I would do: be as controversial as possible and take hardline opinions in one direction or another on whatever subject matter I'm on. Yep. I don't do those things.
Yeah, same, dude. I've been very much tempted multiple times to get into more like political discussions and all these other things, and just like, I don't care to do them. And I'm not going to do it just for the sake of like growing the show or building an audience and just saying stuff that I know is going to get a reaction, even if I don't fully believe it or completely understand the backstory. It's like, man, you got to also understand that like this stuff lives online forever. Yes. So like, I don't want to be, especially having kids. Like I don't want to be on here saying stuff for the sake of getting views now, and then have my kids look at it later on and be like, what are you talking about?
I wonder if on the bright side though, I wonder if we're going to get to a point in society where people are numb to a lot of that, because now the kids that are growing up, like the youngest kids, their parents grew up or mostly grew up on this stuff. It's an accepted part of society. Now, they're still aligned with that. Like these two fucking morons in Britain who are trying to fuck 1,000 guys a day, dude. And the whole OnlyFans culture and stuff like that.
I saw it the other day.
Yeah, there's a line.
Like the day before, the day of, when I was leaving to come here, I saw that, and I was talking to my wife about it. I was like, this just saddens me.
Yeah.
It makes me so sad. I have friends who do it. It's just like, it's such a difference from like a 22-year-old to like a 34-year-old.
Yes.
And I just think if that's truly what you want to do, do whatever you want. But also, I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to regret those decisions by the time they're a decade older.
Yeah. Who did I have on? Oh, when I was talking with It's Blanco, big YouTuber, does a great job with like these investigative videos.
Okay.
And one of the ones he did in like the last maybe 6-7 months was about the recent, often like suicides of porn stars and stuff. And one of the women, I think, who ended up offing herself, I felt so bad for, because she had been in an interview talking about how she doesn't want to have kids because she doesn't want them subjected to this for decisions she made when she was 20. And listen, there's people who are like, well, fuck you, you became a porn star. I was an idiot when I was 20. I was very lucky I didn't have a rack. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Especially again, we're talking about the job world and all this stuff. And like, if the option is like, okay, I can be a barista and make $13 an hour,
or I can shake my titties and make 1,000.
Right.
That's right.
Or 100,000.
Yes.
Like I understand the temptation, and I get it. And like I said, I think some people, I have friends who are in that industry, and any conversations I've had with them, they seem great. But I think that a majority are going to regret a lot of the decisions that they're making right now, just purely based in it's usually financial or it's status based. And they want more followers, they want more likes. It makes them feel better about who they are. It fills some sort of, lack.
Absolutely.
That they're feeling internally. And,
there's a lot going on there.
That.
Yes, there's a lot. It's more than just the money in most cases. But like also, you said you've been married for like 11 years? 11 years. So you got married young. I take it your wife wasn't on OnlyFans?
High school sweetheart, yeah.
There you go. And I just say this to say this because it is what it is. Would you ever want to marry a chick who was on OnlyFans?
No.
Yeah.
I wouldn't personally never, I just never would. And especially like, that girl with 1,000 dudes in a day is just like.
Well, she's ridiculous. she honestly, like, that's where I got to remember how much I value free speech, because my first thought is prison. Like she did a cum walk the other day. Did you see that?
No.
Yeah. No. Where she like, you can't even get away. I don't want this in my feed, but it's in my feed. Like you can't get away from it. And I'm like, oh my God, who is seeing this and actually thinking, I could do that and make money from that? I'm not even going to describe what that was. It's exactly what it sounds like. But it's like you see this and it does make you lose some hope sometimes, because people will literally do anything and demoralize anything with the power of the internet. And it's like, what's that one song? I can never get the tune right when I have these headphones in, but it's like, I want a shorty who doesn't have too many likes and stuff like that.
Okay.
That's cool to me.
Yeah.
The girl who doesn't live for social media, forget even being on OnlyFans or something like that, doesn't live for social media, is cute and happy in her own world, is like a rarity now. And that's really what I'd like. I want someone who is self-confident in themselves and doesn't have to worry about creating this perfect life for other people online, or shaking her titties online for other people. Like I wouldn't want my future kids, no disrespect, but I'm unabashed. I wouldn't want them subjected to that in school.
Yeah.
It's just, that would not be for me.
Yeah. Having a daughter changes a lot for sure.
Oh yeah.
For me, like I'm very much freedom is a value of mine. So you're free to do whatever you want as long as it doesn't harm other people. That's always like my thing. Just like you can, the trans stuff, great. You want to get a nice set of boobs and you're a dude. Yeah, you do you, bro. Whatever you feel like you want to do, that's fine. Yep. But as soon as you start like pushing that into other people's lives forcing other people to engage in that idea, that's when we have a disagreement. It's just like you can't once it starts harming others and like doing this stuff online and then inspiring young ladies to up their body count to 1,000, like crazy. That's not a worthy goal. That's not inspirational in a good way, and like I said, in a decade, we're going to see how it plays out. And I don't feel like it's going to play out well for her or for anybody that follows down that path. And it gets to the point where like, you can't change. You're too invested in that identity. Like if at some point, if 5 years from now, she's like, I don't want to do this anymore and I want to change who I am. It's like, it's too late.
No.
It's online.
You're done.
Forever. Yeah. Like it is imprinted on the minds of everybody even if you delete all of it now, doesn't matter.
You're done.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I do think we're gonna have to reckon with it. The only comeback to that though is things have been around long enough that we've already seen the reckoning of people in the past, and yet we're not learning from that.
Yeah,
these porn stars I talked about, some of them were around in 2009, 2010, and yet there's still women like that today who are like, I'm just gonna get fucked and make a lot of money. And it's like, all right, I'm exactly with you. I think people should be free to do what they want to do, and also free to not tell people that they have to do that too.
Yeah, correct.
That's really ultimately. It has to work both ways in that sense. But we also are locked in just what the nature of everything in society is. I talk about this all the time on my show in different contexts, but the universal law of physics says for every action, there's an equal but opposite reaction, which means that the bigger the action is, the stronger the reaction is, which means the pendulum swings go more and more. And with the internet, where the anecdotal can create all the attention and the definition of what something is, right? Things tend to react harder and harder. And I wish we could live more in a society where the actions were here, but we live in one where it's here and here, and it's exhausting because it goes like this. And you get the people who get the most attention are the ones who say the loudest and most viscerally reactive things in either direction. Yeah. And you end up compensating too far in one direction or another at a different time. Right. And I think about this often. And then, if you're thinking about something like, oh, did mommy get railed on camera 10 years ago? That seems a little more obvious, but it's also like, you don't want to go to Sharia law. You know what I mean? Like, exactly. But there's people who like openly, they're not necessarily talking about Sharia law, but I hear more and more of like, we need to like cover our women up and everything. I'm like, look, if my wife looks good in a bikini, like she should wear that. You know what I mean? But she doesn't need to be out there shaking her titties for $5.
Even if she doesn't look good in a bikini, she can wear it if she wants to.
Yeah,
right,
sure.
Right. Autonomy, freedom, you do you. Yeah, the red pill movement is kind of on the opposite spectrum. And it's like, I don't like again, I have a son. So I think about it in that context. Like, I don't want him, growing up to be like some of these dudes who treat women like they're literally a second-class citizen, and just as an object, and value these things that are just wildly detrimental to the progress that we've made in society as a whole. It just you don't have to be on these crazy polarizing sides. No, and in fact, I would argue that it's probably unhealthy to be there.
Yeah, and I've seen it. I've seen it with people close to me. I've seen people in different directions in different subject matters. And I'm just talking politics or something like that. Like everything is politics these days. Things that aren't political are political in the sense of the swings and the teams. Right. I should say that they're on, but it's never healthy. And people they get themselves to a point where they're so convinced that their worldview on this thing is 100% right, that anything that's against that is fucking moronic and doesn't even deserve
satanic
to have an opinion. Yeah. And they use, like, I try to stay away from all this stuff because I've evaluated it in my own life over the years when I get caught up in certain little things, and then what I think a year later after that.
Right,
and
exactly.
I've learned from that. You know, you should have those times when you're young and figuring it the fuck out, where you probably get involved with stuff that later you're like, well, that was dumb. But like that way you learn from it. And so I know what this is, and I you know, knock on wood, I don't get caught up in that. I fight against it. I fight against anything that's groupthink. That could be another benefit of being an only child, by the way. I'm starting to think about that more.
Yeah.
You know, where like you kind of have to sit alone in a room with your own thoughts and formulate them.
Yeah,
and so, you know, the downside, if you ran with that too much, is you just become a rebel against absolutely everything and never agree with anyone's idea and say, I know best. That's not what I do. But the upside is what I do, and that is I'm not just going to run with this group's opinion because they're going to say what happens is people will say, we all believe this, right? And whatever this is like something very simple. It's like, yeah, we agree with that. Okay, so therefore we believe, wait a minute. You just said me. Like 200 other things. Right. They're like, so you're not on the team. Fuck you.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
No, same, dude. I grew up in as a fundamentalist Baptist.
Fundamentalist Baptist.
So I graduated kindergarten on the same campus that I graduated 8th grade, high school, and college, which is also where my church was. So it's like big mega campus. Whoa. And I went there my entire life. So very much, you know, our way or the highway type of a thing. You know, step outside of this particular random rule and it's immediately criticized. And so when I kind of left that world, I was leaving everything behind me. But that was one of the things now that I was forced to face early on, which is now that I've arrived to several different conclusions that I would have fought you hard on when I was 16, 19, 22, you know, like anywhere in that range, that I felt like I'm 100% correct here and I know 100% how to convince you that I'm 100% correct here. I've changed my own thoughts, opinions, beliefs on all of that stuff. And it just led me down this path of like, well, if I had something like that so dead wrong, what else could I potentially be wrong about?
That's it.
What do I currently believe? What do I currently think? How do I currently act that might be, I don't know, something that I could be open to changing or open to thinking about, you know? And I think it was a formative, you know, experience because again, you're forced to work out your own thoughts, your own opinions, your own beliefs. Whereas most people are just kind of given a package of what they should believe and they just abide by that. Why? Because my mom told me to, or why? Because that's how it's always been done, or that's because my teacher said it that way or whatever. And it's like, well, if you can't formulate your own, you know, reasoning for why you've reached this conclusion, especially if it's about something that's extremely important to how you live your day-to-day life, then maybe it's time to maybe ask a couple of questions.
We've demonized two things in society that is really unfortunate. Number one, we've demonized when someone says, you know what, I was wrong about that.
Yes.
Now we have to dogpile them.
Right.
Now if someone...
Flip-flopper. Yeah.
Right. Now if someone is insanely wrong about something and attacks anyone who even tries to get after them for years and years and years and then suddenly says I'm wrong. Okay, yeah, there's some...
Well, there's obviously nuance.
Right,
you know?
There's nuance. But the other thing is we demonize people saying, I don't know, or I'm not sure.
Right.
And I love it when I have an expert in whatever topic, you know, they're an expert in here, and I ask them a really exact question on something that I want an answer to, and they think about it and they're like, you know, I don't think I'm really the guy or gal to answer that.
Well, that's how you know they're a real expert.
Yes.
In my opinion, you know, like real experts are constantly learning.
Yep.
They haven't arrived because none of us have arrived. They're willing to rethink certain concepts based on new information or data that they maybe didn't have before.
That's right.
Adam Grant has a great book called Think Again, where he talks about this entire process of learning how to rethink. And there's these people that he talks about in there that basically are outcome predictors, and they essentially make money by making bets on like things that are happening in society, like elections and things like that. And they make predictive outcomes, or they predict outcomes. And he was talking about how their job is essentially to rethink things based on data. And even they get sucked into confirmation bias that prevents them from being able to change their mind on something, even when presented with data. I was like, if a professional who does this for a living gets sucked into these paths where they make the wrong prediction and lose on something because of a previous belief that existed. If they're still doing it and they know it exists and actively fight against it, what chance do like us regular people have of being able to go through life without ever doing it? It's like we're all guilty of it, but the point is to try to mitigate that to some extent and be willing to rethink some of those things, even if it makes you feel bad, because it never feels good. It feels, Jordan Peterson in his book, Told Rules for Life, he said, I might butcher this, but from what I remember is every bit of change is a little death. And I liked the way that he put that because it feels like that. It's a visceral reaction. Like if somebody says something and it makes you feel a certain way, it's a great idea to sit back and examine why you're feeling like that. You know, like, so growing up fundamentalism, I'd watch a show like Family Guy, which I was not supposed to be watching, but it's hilarious. So I'd watch it. And like, none of it would bother me, like in terms of dirty jokes or whatever, like all that I thought was funny. I felt guilty for watching it, but I still thought it was funny.
Oh, you prayed right afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. I asked for forgiveness, so we're all good. The ones where like I would shut it off or fast forward or move to a different episode is whenever they would make fun of God or Jesus or like the church or anything like that. It truly offended me to my core. And it wasn't until later on that I started asking myself those questions of like, why am I so, like, why do I feel this offended at this? Like, am I like, and it's because most of the time, and that's one of the reasons I love comedy, is that comedy is a really great way of pointing out things that are ridiculous that you hold dear in a very light way with a little bit of levity behind it. But it can also make you really examine that and go, oh, there's some truth to what they're saying. Yeah. Like that's true. If I'm not willing to admit that that's a little bit true, like how can I properly convince somebody else that what I believe is true when I'm never willing to give up that what I believe might not be true?
I feel really bad for people, and this is boiling it down to an even simpler level than what you're saying, but I feel really bad for people that go through life and can't laugh at themselves. Yeah. Or can't think that even something maybe they do hold dear has a little bit of ridiculousness to it. There's nothing wrong with that. Like,
especially because we would make fun of everybody else.
Yeah.
With impunity. Like a preacher from the pulpit could get up and make fun of Catholics and Muslims and Mormons and everything else, and the whole audience is laughing. That's right. And then some politician or some comedian gets up and says something about the thing that you believe, and it's like, well, they're just satanic.
That's where I draw the line.
Yeah, right, exactly. And it's like, well, so you're willing to laugh at everybody else. Like they would do it at like a funeral, or not really a funeral, it's not really a joking matter, but like weddings and stuff like that, you know, where it's like there's a bunch, like this is not our church family. This is a bunch of people from a bunch of different walks of life. Like I brought in my, like, you know, whatever, my cousins or my uncles and aunts or whatever, people that are in here to watch me, whatever, graduate from high school, and you're poking fun at their religion from the pulpit. Like, how do you think that makes them feel? You know what I mean? Like it goes both ways. You can't have your cake and eat it too in that regard. If you're going to make fun of everything else and what everybody else believes, you got to be willing to laugh a little bit about some of the ridiculous things about what you believe, because we all believe ridiculous things. You know, if you believe anything, some of it's going to be ridiculous because none of us actually know anything for a fact, especially when it comes to like, how did we get here? Why are we here? And all that kind of stuff. It's like, you got to be willing to laugh at some of the ridiculousness of our own beliefs sometimes.
100%. That's the hardest thing for me to talk about with people who are firmly in a camp on something. I'll always, at some point in the conversation, whether it be on camera or off, there will be some sort of question. It's always different in some way, but the question essentially will be, what if you found out that even part of what you believe to be true wasn't? Would you be okay? And a lot of people don't want to answer that question. And I'm like, what, you know, like, especially with people who are religious about something. I could have people who are religious about Christianity in here, Islam, fucking UFOs. And it's like, all right, if it wasn't exactly how you thought right now, would your meaning of life be a crisis? And for a lot of them, it in all the respective camps, it feels like the answer to that is yes. And I think that's really sad. Yeah. You know, and then in some form or facet, anyone who has the religious aspect goes, well, that's why you got to have faith. And I'm like, all right, because then they try to guilt you into having faith in something, which is inherently saying have faith in something that doesn't have all of the necessary evidence to say it's a fact, right? And I do live more in the fact world, and I also live in the unknown world. And here's what I mean by that. I am very humble in the face of the fact that I don't know what the fuck is going on. Yeah. But I assume, based on a good amount of evidence, that there is some form of creator, God, if you will, whatever that is, whether it's a mixture of all the religious books written or none of them. It's something that has way more power over me, who only had a 1 in 4 trillion chance of even getting here in the first place.
Right.
So I better do what? I better be as good a person as I can on this earth, do right by others, be honest, all the things that make sense. You shouldn't have to, and I mean this respectfully, you shouldn't have to read a book to be able to say, like, I shouldn't fuck other people over. I should not shoot anyone unless they were shooting at me. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I should not steal from the bank. Like, these are things that just as a human being, ask yourself, does this feel like this is a good thing to do to a human being or another living thing?
Yeah.
And if you even have to pause, then chances are it's not.
Yeah.
You know? And so I try to live my life in that way, and I'm not perfect, but like, I would imagine when it ends and whatever happens, or whatever maker I got to face or whatever, they're not going to sit there and pull out one of the religious texts or, you know, some fucking internet blog that said this is how things are and read from page 37 and say, but you didn't believe this, so guess what? You're not allowed in the next thing.
All eternity.
Yeah, they're not going to do that.
Right.
And if they do, then they're not the creator that I think they are.
Yeah, right, exactly. And it's weird that you would be okay with that version of that creator.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's always the thing that gets me now. Because I'm more or less agree with you on that. Like I think that something else exists. I just don't think that we necessarily know the name.
That's right.
Like you said, it could be exactly all the religions combined. It could be none of them. It could be, you know, whatever it is. But I believe that something exists that's greater than we are. And you know, maybe that is where the sense of morality comes from. I don't know. But also, you know, that doesn't mean that your particular version that you're preaching all the time is the only one. Because that's when it moves to faith. And by the way, I respect your faith. Like I'm totally fine. The ones that I have trouble with are the ones who are not willing to admit that it involves a big leap of faith at some point. It's like if you can't admit that it involves a big leap of faith and you're trying to still logic your way into believing this, it's just you're not going to convince me. Because the bottom line is, bro, you take a Baptist preacher who's 90 years old. You take a Catholic priest who's 90 years old. You take a Buddhist monk who's 90 years old. You take a, you know, Jewish rabbi, and, you know, a Pentecostal preacher who they believe, you know, you have to speak in tongues in order to actually be saved and make to heaven. You take all those people, you put them in a room, you give them one Bible. They're all going to leave with the same beliefs that they went into that room with.
That's right.
With the same book. So you're not going to logic your way into making all of those other people believe the thing that you believe. So when you're casting judgments on everybody else for not having the same faith that you have, like that's where I have a problem with it.
That's where I draw the line. I'll go a step farther than you. The people who aren't willing to admit that it takes at least some form of enormous leap of faith to believe all the things they do, that's fine. As long as you don't try to turn that around on me and say, because I don't do that too, wrong. I'm damned to hell and I'm wrong. Yeah. At that point, I'm going to be like, get the fuck out of here. You know, that's where I draw the line. But people, if there's people who believe that way, but it gives them, and they don't force it on me, and it gives them tremendous peace in life, and it makes them an amazing person, I think that's great.
Absolutely.
You keep doing that. That sounds awesome to me.
Yep. Raise your family how you want, do the things you like. That's totally fine. Again, as long as you're not expecting everybody else to fall in line.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, listen, dude, I know we got a few minutes here. I want to talk a little bit about the podcasting stuff. Obviously, something that I really enjoy. When you started the show, was it always going to be interviews?
Well, I always say this. I've never interviewed anyone in my life.
Okay.
I just talk with people.
Conversations.
Because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do what I already did in real life and just put it on camera. I remember the genesis of this was, I remember when I first listened to Joe Rogan, probably back in like 2018, he would have these long conversations with all different people, just like I like doing. And they'd be off the cuff and real, and you felt like you were at the table with them. And they also, at any given moment, could straddle the line from being, you know, ridiculously comedic to like incredibly serious and deep at any moment in any one podcast. And so when I first found that, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Was listening to that. And I said, let me go find other podcasts like this. I couldn't really find it. Yeah. Because the other podcasts that might be long form and talk to a bunch of different people, they were almost always either pure comedy, like, and they're great, but like comedians doing just all comedy stuff, or pure seriousness, whether it be scientists or like self-help gurus, whatever. And I'm like, the people that kind of marry those two worlds, I know there's a lot of us out here, but they're not doing shows. And I was also like, well, Joe Rogan's like also twice my age. I'm like, there's why don't I do that? Like that was part of it. I'm like, why the fuck don't I do it? I already do it. Let's just put cameras on it. Right. And so I always knew I wanted to do that. And it just kind of morphed into that quickly. I just didn't think at the beginning that anyone would come in to do it because I would only do it in person. I was never going to download Zoom. Wasn't an option. I don't even know how to talk to people on Zoom. So, I was like, all right, I'm probably going to have to do like 40 solo episodes before someone wants to come in. So when I launched, I built the podcast like around the clock for 6 months, launched it publicly September 15th, 2020. And I launched with 10 episodes. One of them was I had been recording music for my cousin in the studio over the summer. So we just sat down and did like an hour. So that was like technically the first guest episode. And then I also got my other friend who was like a social activist to come in and talk about like that crazy 2020 summer. And that was a good one. All the others were solos. So I had recorded like 3 or 4, or I think 4 or 5 more at that point. And immediately when I started the podcast, I had a bunch of friends like reach out and say, yo, we'd come in. I was like, oh, great. I never thought to like say, hey, can you come over for a few hours and like talk on camera? But a lot of people did. And I just, the first 86 episodes, the requirements were, can you talk and can you breathe? And so it was just like, we had fun. And then there were people in my network that I have relationships with who did have seriously cool resumes that we got to work in there. And then eventually like it more morphed into, okay, now I can fly in people to Philly and bring them to my parents' house and start to get to all different topics I'm interested in. And it just kind of morphed from there. But yeah, I have a talent, I will admit, for doing those solo podcasts. I can sit here in a room alone and I guess entertain people for an hour, but I don't like doing those. Okay. I don't like talking to myself. I much more enjoy bouncing ideas off other people and getting ideas bounced off of me. Yeah. So I knew that's what I wanted to do. It just happened faster, even though I didn't have any audience or whatever. The ability to actually do it that way happened way faster. And I've never changed how I do it. I let it go where it goes. And I do have an audio-visual memory and a photographic memory. So that helps because I can download ideas and terms and they're just kind of in there. And then in the course of a conversation, I can get it there with it. Yeah, exactly. Sure. Exactly. Like when Trump went on Flagrant and talked about the weave, yeah. I was like, he just put it in words. Yeah. Like I've been doing that my whole life. That's exactly right. Now he's like ridiculous with it as far as like how crazy his weave gets.
Well, to be fair, people allow him that liberty.
Yes.
Because he's Donald Trump. So.
Yeah, we're talking on the day of the inauguration. He was just doing it again for like an hour, and like all these presidents forever, they do like a big speech, right?
Speech,
and then that's it. So he goes and does that, and then goes downstairs. He says, "Now I'm doing the real speech," and like just talks about I don't even know what the fuck. And the media is going to kill him for it. But what are we doing right now? We're both laughing because it's funny as fuck. Because he's just like, I'm gonna talk about it. They're all our enemies. Yeah. We're gonna close the border. Governor's here. We're gonna get, and you're just like, this is just entertaining. Right. And so there's something about that makes a ton of sense. That at the highest level of pop culture, which is like the presidency, you have a guy doing a lot of the things that people do on like stupid shows like mine. Right. And also you have the guys who run these quote unquote, like all of our stupid shows. Cause that's all they're just shows, right? We're not changing the world here, but in some ways, some of these guys now are. Yeah. Because they just played a huge role.
I was going to ask
in
about
the election.
That.
Yeah. It was really amazing. Like, props to them.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens in podcasting in the next decade or so. Cause it seems like the presidential election is like a testing ground for new marketing strategies.
100%.
You know what I mean? So Obama, the 2008 election was Facebook.
Yep. First social media president.
Yeah. Right. And then like everything gets tested and there's influencers, celebrities have been part of it for a while, but this is the first one that was like the podcast election, where a huge percentage of a vote from a segment of people who just don't go vote, they were out voting. And it was like, I gotta think that there's something to that, because you see, you look at the, Call Her Daddy is one of the biggest podcasts out there, and Kamala did Call Her Daddy. I don't know what it's sitting at right now, but at the time it was at like 850,000 views or something like that. Compared to Trump on Rogan got like 45 million or something in a 48-hour period. It was just like wildly different.
Yeah.
It was like, she clearly is not connecting with this audience.
Yeah.
And then he did another dozen shows on top of that. You know, I know you had Sean Ryan on your show. You did Sean Ryan's show. You did Patrick Davis.
He did all of them, man.
All the big shows that had the exact segment that he needed to come out and vote. He activated that segment through podcasting.
And that's the thing. When you look at this through the analysis of political science, you have a really controversial guy in Donald Trump who has been unfairly attacked in a lot of ways, but also has brought a lot on himself over the years.
But also fairly attacked in a lot of ways.
In the nature of how he acts about stuff. To you and me, it is funny because I'm a big comedy guy. It's hilarious, but I would, like, during his first presidency, I would simultaneously laugh my ass off at shit and then just be like, this is not good. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
No,
this
same.
is not great for the world, but whatever. This election, you really saw people fed up.
Yeah.
You saw people fed up with all the economic stuff we talked about earlier. You saw people fed up with these endless wars. You saw people fed up with being lied to their face by the regular old corrupt establishment, which has always been corrupt. You saw people fed up with, you know, how they handled all the pandemic shit. And so it normalized a guy like Donald Trump, which is like hard to do.
Right.
But it looking at it politically, like, it normalized him. And then when you combine that with he was also willing to be a normal guy and go on all these independent programs, long form, unscripted, and she was unwilling to do it.
Yep.
People can smell that, man. And they can smell right through it. And also, like, you know, there were far stronger candidates to run than her. And part of the reason there were far stronger candidates is because she couldn't string a sentence together.
Yeah, it was a wild, like, it was pretty crazy to watch them, like, gaslight half of the country to be like, no, she's actually really great.
It's hilarious.
It was like worst approval rating of any vice president in history. That's the person you're going to run and then pretend like she's awesome. Like everybody was on board for that the whole time.
She was better than Dick Cheney. I'm going to give her that. but point taken.
Yeah, right. But you know what I mean? It's like, you can't, how's that going to work? You know, and it didn't. And I think one of the big things is that because he was willing to do it and she wasn't willing to do it, that by itself was a red flag. Yeah. It was just like, how can you're touring all across the country to go do a live appearance in front of a few thousand people, right? Regardless of where it is. You have the opportunity to go on Rogan that gets, I gotta imagine, north of 10 million downloads an episode just on audio.
Oh, it does more than that.
Yeah.
He was doing 11 million in 2019 on audio.
Okay, so just audio.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're talking an audience size that's
insane.
A multiple of any of the biggest arenas that you've done on this campaign trail. And you're not going to drop everything to make sure that you do that hit. Right. Like that to me was just like you guys know something's going to go wrong, because they offered it, but they were like, it's got to be less than an hour or an hour max, and you have to come to us or something. Yeah. And Rogan was like, sorry, that's just not how we do things.
It was hilarious that they like the minute I knew that these political animals who were running her campaign were still the same people stuck on K Street doing fucking steak dinners with people at night and saying, oh yeah, this social media thing, well, we can just pay some influencers. The minute I knew that was still the case is when the first story dropped. I think it was in the New York Post that said Kamala's team was in Austin meeting with Joe Rogan's team. If you know anything about Joe, I don't know Joe Rogan at all personally, but if you are a fan out there and know anything about how that guy operates, the mere concept of like my team meeting with your
PR team,
bro, he smokes weed in a studio and plays a video game outside of it, and then you show up and he says, hey, let's fucking go. There's no like, this is that corporate-y, like, yeah, so I have a hard stop at 5 and, you know, we can, there was just a complete disconnect. And, you know, that's something that they got to reckon with right now. Like I view the Democratic Party as in a very similar political place as like the post-Bush Cheney years that the Republican Party was in, where they've really just, it's been self-inflicted wounds. Right. Like it's not necessarily that back when Bush and Cheney were around, the Democrats were doing great things. It's just they were that bad. And now we've seen that again. And I think part of the problem here now is that there was this real pressure that developed in the Trump years, since he came up in 2015, where the left side just had such a derangement to him, where it's okay not to like him, but the derangement was so strong that anything he says, we say opposite, to the point that he was able to goad them into saying things that made objectively no sense and force them to make political alliances that made no sense. And so a lot of these politicians were on the Democratic side were in a position where they've now taken just a handful of stances that are so dumb, like that make no sense.
Right.
There's no such thing as two genders. Well, that's just dumb.
Yeah.
Now they're going to go on a podcast that's unscripted, and if they get backed into a corner, which this isn't even being backed into a corner, but if Joe Rogan's like, so
it's just asking a simple question.
Yeah, like there's two genders, right? Well, it's now they're in a political position where they can't say that.
Right.
And now, because they just got their ass kicked, perhaps there's going to be a reevaluation, a shaking out of the dirty laundry, if you will, so that they can get rid of these stupid stances and they can actually have open conversations in the future. That's what I hope, at least.
Yeah, it was just so funny seeing the backlash of the Rogan thing, because anybody who's not in that world, like any of the people who still believe traditional media is the place to be, they were just so shocked by it. Like, apparently this Rogan thing did something. It's like, how are you still shocked by this? Like, you realize the volume of people that tune into this show regularly, and what it does, and what a 3-hour conversation does compared to a 6-minute talking point news hit. Like, the discrepancy there is insane. And the fact that you're still sitting there, I can't believe this happened. Like, what do you mean you can't believe this happened? This has been happening for a long time. Yeah. Like, how are you still this completely in the dark on this? And when it all came out, it was somebody asked Jon Stewart. They're like, do you think the left needs their own version of Joe Rogan or whatever? And Jon Stewart answered it fantastic, which is basically like, I don't see that Rogan's really on either side. He had Bernie Sanders on the last one. He had Tulsi Gabbard when she was running on the Democratic ticket. And he's admittedly a lifelong Democrat. I think this is the first time he's ever voted Republican.
First time he's ever
it's like, you're pushing all of these, like, and the comments were full of people just being like, Joe Rogan was the left's Joe Rogan. Yes. Like, he was that guy. You had him in your corner for decades. He was the guy.
Look at what they did.
And then this is the first time, but the people who were outside of that sphere didn't even recognize that, because all they heard was CNN talking about how he took horse dewormer, which is also insane. And again, you bring on Sanjay Gupta, the chief medical correspondent for CNN, to ask. So Rogan asked him a couple of questions like, hey, that wasn't like a great way to represent what ivermectin is, right? And then just the scrambling that they do to be like, it's like, just answer the question, man. That's not, like, that you were propping up some bullshit story to defame this person because you saw him as a threat to the agenda that you were trying to push at the time, which was the vax.
Yep.
And now, like, you've pushed so hard in that direction and literally tried to defame his character to the degree where you're actually pushing him away from the party that he's been a part of since he was able to vote.
Look what they did to Elon.
Elon, same way. Thing. Tulsi Gabbard, same thing. RFK, same thing. Yep. Like, these are lifelong Kennedy. Lifelong Democrats.
Crazy.
You're pushing in to support the Republican ticket.
And
then pointing the finger at them and calling them like bigots and racists and like, you're wrong. And I think the electorate just had enough of it in this last election.
Yeah. And I hope, I had my friend Rotimi in here, who is a Democratic strategist, who, when I had him on a couple years ago, there's this thing that happens when I'm sitting across from someone in a closed studio like this where you can see their brain moving. And I would ask him these questions about things and I would see him pause. And in his head, I knew he had one answer. But in the other side of his head, I knew he had a job.
He was pushing it through the filter of what he's allowed to say. Yeah.
And he had to go to what he had to say. And I was asking him on the stupidest things. I'm talking like, should a trans swimmer be allowed to swim against women? Like, just to see. And I could see that he wasn't answering what he really thought. And what was really cool is literally on election night, something in him felt freed to suddenly be like, no, fuck this, right? Because he's like a true liberal, true Democrat, really believes like a lot of the main traditional stances and everything. And we just had him in here again with my buddy Mike Spear, who's a conservative guy. And it was amazing how much he was saying that Spear was like, sounds right. And we need to see more of that, because I was saying to him, I'm like, some of these fucking experts who were saying the left needs to put all this money into forming their own Joe Rogan, a day after the election. I'm like, you're the problem. You immediately stop. You think, first of all, you're already making the assumption that Joe Rogan was like a right-wing invention.
Exactly.
That's already a mistake.
Exactly.
Secondly, you think throwing money at the problem is the thing here. That is 1970s thinking.
Right.
People, why?
That's why her campaign costs so much money.
Why do people listen to me 100 times more than they listen to some celebrities who start podcasts with 100 million followers?
Right.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. But it's because there is something about in this space, in the space of conversation and people talking, especially over the long form, where people want genuine, real things that aren't bought, fucking sold, and paid for. Right. And the fact that these guys still can't, I mean, they got time, but like they still think, some of them, that they can throw money at the problem is insane to me, because it's like, you to your point, all these people got pushed there. Yep. They didn't start there.
Yep.
And I have stayed away from it. I like to maintain my journalistic integrity. When I go and vote, I write in abstain journalist, right? And that's what I'm going to continue to do. And I will say this, and this isn't throwing any shade at any of the podcasts that did podcasts with Trump, because I know for a fact almost all of them asked her to come on and she said no. So props to them. But for me, just the way I think about it, maybe it's my OCD. If I can't have both, I'm not doing either, because I never want to affect an election or whatever. I want to go in there, and like, if by affecting an election it means one does really bad on my show with basic questions and another doesn't, then that's fine.
Sure.
That's fine. But the
opportunity for both is
opportunity is what I would want. But props to Joe Rogan, because and he was so nice about it publicly too. I'd have been like, bitch, what the fuck? Like, you have the audacity. This guy just came in here for 3 hours, and you have the audacity to say, well, you can fly to Colorado for an hour and we get final cut while her people stand back there and go like this.
Right.
Come on. You're already the wrong candidate if that's what it is. Before, like with this election, it was like before you even got to the political issues, just look at it from like a basic human, I don't know, like strength scenario. She just wasn't strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just how it is.
It turned out that you were correct on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think like the guy you're talking about, who was finally able to kind of speak his mind. I think people like that are free to say what they think, because they're actually like, oh, the majority of Americans actually do agree with this. I'm not crazy for because you get involved in these echo chambers when especially you work in a field like that. Everybody in your office talks about it a certain way. Everybody you know talks about it a certain way. And if you have anything that goes against that, it's like you feel like you're crazy for thinking anything different. Right. It's like when you see that this is the first time he actually won the popular vote in addition to the electoral college, it's like, oh, I feel like I can actually say these things without everybody being like, I completely disagree with you, and you're like, not even it's not ever just I disagree with you. It's you're now a racist, sexist, xenophobic, homophobic piece of shit, and you can just fuck right off, and it's like, well, that is a thought canceling thing to begin with. You can't be the party of free speech and progress when you're doing that. You know what I mean?
We got to stop that. And here's the thing. It was something that it felt like it started more with the left phenomenon. And now it does feel like there's a very similar vibe in subsets of the right. And this needs to be stopped on both sides. Now, look, it is politics. It's always been polarized throughout history. That is how it is. There's always going to be some segment of that. But what I don't want is those segments to grow so big that we stop talking to each other. That's why I really try to stay away. Like when people start throwing out terms like, oh, Civil War and shit like that, I'm like, stop. Yeah. Stop. Like that's not helping. I do think, this is just how I feel, being in this industry with it sounds like kind of like almost like grandiose to say it like this, but it's going to make sense. Like, with great power comes great responsibility. So if we as an independent media industry are developing a power of having, let's say, power being defined as broad reach, we got to not become what they did in the mainstream. And there are facets and elements that I see in independent media that I don't like, that are they're not there, but they're trending in that direction. And listen, I'm not going to throw stones from glass houses. I get shit wrong. There's no doubt about it. I'll tell you that. And when there's situations where that needs to be addressed publicly, I'm going to do that too. But I want my intentions behind the scenes to be pure. I'm one of these guys that literally looks in the mirror and evaluates myself on that, because you know if you're chasing this or chasing that, or running with the flow on this or running with the flow on that. And I want to do my best to be able to provide the best information we can. My friend Sean Ryan actually had a situation, I guess it was like a few months ago, because it was like before the election, where a guy came on his show. And, obviously Sean is extremely conservative, and pretty much everyone he has on is extremely conservative. That's where he leans. But a guy came on his show and made some claim about like a helicopter that was supposed to be sending aid to North Carolina that Kamala Harris took pictures in front of, never went to North Carolina. It was just a photo op. And that turned out to be totally false.
Yeah.
And Sean, to his credit, came out and made a video and said, I'm really sorry. That was incorrect information. We have the proof to show that helicopter did go to North Carolina. My apologies to Vice President Harris. That's cool. I like that. And there needs to be, and that's a guy who's really conservative doing that in the build up to an election where he don't want that bitch to win. You know what I mean? But like, he did that. And I think we need to see things like that happen in our profession. And there has to be like, all right, you didn't go to journalism school. I respect that. Neither did I. That just because we didn't go get the degree doesn't mean we shouldn't try to hold ourselves to some of those standards, because when we see the New York Times or Washington Post not hold themselves to those standards, we're the first to be like, fuck you, as we should. So let's not do that too. You don't have to get everything right, but do your best, bet what you can, do it with the right intentions. And when you really do get something like purely wrong, admit it.
Listen, dude, I'm sure we could keep talking like this for a long time. I got to run into another interview, and I know you got a bunch of other stuff to do. So before we take off here, where's the best place people can go to connect with you a little bit more?
YouTube, Julian Dorey, and then Julian Dorey Clips is the second channel. Julian Dorey Daily is the third channel, where we do 1 hour podcasts. And then Instagram, I'm at Julian D. Dorey. We also have Julian Dorey Podcast on Instagram for clips, and those are the best spots.
Sweet. Julian, thanks so much for doing this, man. Everybody listening, watching, remember to leave every relationship better than you found it. Catch you in the next episode. Peace.
Thank you.